This episode is sponsored by StationWise, the first staffing software to be truly firefighter-proof. Now, you may be wondering why I have software as a sponsor when I focus usually on physical and mental health of the first responders, and I will tell you exactly why. For the first time, this is a staffing platform that also is able to integrate wellness information through call load tracking, exposures, and wearables integration. Now, of course, StationWise focuses on staffing and allows you to manage staffing, choose vacation picks, put in rules for leave and trades, and even deploying strike teams. But through the latest programming and AI automation, they have streamlined this process to free up battalion chiefs so they can focus on what they're supposed to be doing on the operational side and the fireground. Now, StationWise is also able to monitor not only how many calls we've responded to in a shift, but the duration of the call, therefore the rest and recovery in between, thus monitoring the sleep deprivation that degrades our health and performance. It's accessible not only through the computer, but also on Apple and Android devices, meaning that you can access it not only within the station itself, but outside as well. Now, one of the most powerful features of StationWise, in my opinion, is the ability to run reports. Therefore, for example, be able to see just how much money is being used on overtime that could actually be front-loaded for proactive staffing, as well as setting alarms knowing when you are hitting overtime parameters. And another important feature is the integration of other programs and software for payroll, training, reports, etc. Now, StationWise is trusted by numerous agencies in California, Texas, and Idaho. And if you want to hear the full story from the founder, who he himself is a son of a firefighter, listen to episode 1163 with Marcus Edwards. And if you want to book a demo or learn more, go to stationwise.com. This episode is sponsored by Transcend, a veteran-owned and operated performance optimization company that I introduced recently as a sponsor on this show. Well, since then, I have actually been using my products and I've had incredible success. There was initial blood work that was extremely detailed, and based on that, they offered supplementation. So I began taking DHEA, BPC 157 for inflammation, based on the fact that I've been a stuntman, a martial artist, and a firefighter my whole life. Lots of aches and pains. Dihexa to help cognition after multiple punches to the head and shift work, and peptides. 4 months later, they did a detailed blood work again, and I was actually able to taper off 2 of the peptides because my body had responded so well to just one of them that it was optimized at that point. So I cannot speak highly enough of the immense range of supplementation that they offer, whether it's male health, female health, peptides to boost your own testosterone, which I would argue is needed by a lot of the fire service, or whether it's exogenous testosterone needed, especially after TBIs or advanced age. Now, as I mentioned before, the other side of this company is an altruistic arm called the Transcend Foundation, which is putting veterans and first responders through some of their protocols free of charge. Now, Transcend are also offering you, the audience, 10% off their protocols. And you can find that on jamesgearing.com under the Products tab. And if you want to hear more about Transcend and their story, listen to episode 808 with the founder, Ernie Colling. Or go to transcendcompany.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show 30-year law enforcement veteran, director of the Ontario Provincial Police Association, and author Rob Jamieson. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from Rob's journey into the world of law enforcement, fighting organized crime, protecting the indigenous population, entering the union leadership position after fraudulent practices of the previous administration, how they were able to rebuild trust amongst the ranks and leadership, mental health, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of almost 1,200 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Rob Jamieson. Enjoy. Well, Rob, I want to start by saying thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's a true privilege and honor. Thank you, James.
So where on planet Earth are we finding you this afternoon?
You're finding me in about a foot of snow in Barrie, Ontario. And I live here with my family. I just recently retired from the Ontario Provincial Police in our police union, the OPP Association. And that's where I reside. And as I was mentioning to you, I still have to go out and shovel some snow. So thank you very much for having me on today. It's, like I said, it's a real privilege. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm excited for this conversation. Starting at the very beginning of your timeline then, tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
Yeah, so I was born in Toronto, but what was formerly known, I guess, as North York General. And my family, we didn't have a whole lot financially, sort of growing up, but we had a pretty solid family. I feel really blessed. We lived on a farmhouse that my parents rented off the farmers in Richmond Hill. It was on a dairy farm, so we lived there for a few years when I was young. And it's interesting. To this day, even as a young child, and as you know, these things sort of affect. It's amazing what happens in your youth that continues to affect you throughout your life, and there's different nuances. But we moved from there to a small town called Port Perry, which is about an hour northeast of Toronto. So I grew up in a small town, and have some amazing family, some amazing friends. Up until today, went to university in Thunder Bay, Ontario. I went to Lakehead University, and I have one brother. He lives in Singapore. He's a teacher. I have his wife and his son, and I have a lovely wife, Leah, and my daughters. One is in university, going through to be a commercial airline pilot, and my other daughter, which she's talking about right now, possibly getting into profession of policing and law enforcement. So, strong, capable, powerful women, and I've been blessed with a great family, and like I said, and friends, and it's like I said, we didn't have a whole lot, but that's okay. It's always kept me grounded, and especially in the type of police work that I got into, and joining the Ontario Provincial Police in 1995. We police, it's very similar to the state troopers, similar to like a Michigan state trooper kind of model where you're doing the highways, but you're also providing policing services to small towns and municipalities and medium-sized communities. So it was a great spot. And being from a small town and policing small towns, it's exactly what I love to do. Yeah.
What did your parents do as far as occupation?
So my dad, it's been a tough year. Just on that note, my dad, we just recently got dad into a nursing home, and so it's been exceptionally tough. My mom grew up on military bases in Petawawa and Borden. Went to high school. Her dad, my grandfather, was in World War II. He was a combat engineer. France, Italy, many of the front lines. Ahead of the front lines, and Korea. And so my mom grew up in a pretty structured environment, shall we say. And she was a nurse, and it was just an incredible human being. And then my dad, just an awesome guy too, but we all grew up playing hockey. He owned a sports store in a small town, and he was an accountant on a dealership, that sort of thing. And like I said, I just been really, really blessed. And, Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear about your dad. I mean, that's a hard decision to have to make.
It's tough. It's like so many people, have had to go through it, or going through it, will go through it. It's a tough system to navigate. It's not something that it takes a lot of energy, but you do it. You step up because these are the ones that you love and that they've taken care of you. And he's content and he's in a good place, and they treat him with respect. So I appreciate your words. Thank you, James.
You mentioned that your grandfather was a World War II veteran. Were you
Yes.
ever able to hear him talking about the war at all?
Well, it's interesting you say that. No, my grandfather experienced some pretty severe things. We would only hear he did not speak like some veterans. Him and my grandmother. My grandmother's 103. Actually, she's a World War II veteran. She was in the RCAF women's division in World War II. And I often ask her still to this day, I said, tell us about the time you're up in the Harvards, when they're doing the bombing runs at the gunnery school you were at and stuff. And she walks a quarter mile a day. She's at 103. She's just incredible. But my grandfather, even when he went into the nursing home, I know my mom, they had, they would have conversations, and it's, they would say, hey, listen, my grandfather was such an incredible human being, didn't talk about it. And, went to the Legion and, had a few drinks and that sort of thing. Obviously there was no appreciation at that time for some of the effects of trauma, especially some of the things that I can only imagine that he's seen. My uncle has told me a couple of things. Obviously being as a combat engineer or a sapper in World War II, not only were you on the front lines, and sometimes you were ahead of the front lines, blowing up bridges or building bridges or doing those sorts of things. So, I just know from some of the stories, a couple of stories I've heard that, he was certainly there and did it and had the T-shirt. And certainly being a police officer now and being diagnosed with complex PTSD myself, I can appreciate somewhat. I could never put myself in the position and the experiences that he had, but I can appreciate somewhat why he would be reluctant and others would be reluctant to talk about these things, because it's extremely triggering and certainly can cause, it's incredibly difficult to talk about. Yeah.
You kind of alluded to the impact of early life on later life. One of the things that was, I was educated on early in this podcast was the impact of experiences as a child that would then factor in our career. So if they were unaddressed trauma, for example, and it was pushed down, it would be a compounding effect for all the other things that we see and do. When you reflect back now with this, different lens that we have in 2025, and we're talking about mental health, what were, if any, elements that contributed to your struggles later?
These are conversations that I've often had. And obviously in 2020, I've been to, I was president and chief executive officer of the Ontario Provincial Police Association. There's a title. I ended up being in residential treatment twice at a place called Project Trauma Support. And, it's not lost on me that some people have been through quite a bit of childhood trauma. And certainly it presents itself throughout their lives in many different ways, whether it's addictions or certain behaviors or whatever. I look back and I think it wasn't so much my childhood, my youth. Like I said, we didn't have a whole lot, but a lot of my friends didn't have a whole lot either. This isn't. We were fortunate. There was a few things that we didn't do or participate in, but for the most part, I was very blessed. I didn't have some of the trauma that some people I know and love and respect did, and some of the people that I've met along the way as a police officer. When I was a detective in major crime, I would investigate, sexual offenses against children, for example. And, I saw firsthand what some of that trauma did to young people. And it's always what sort of fueled me with regards to those investigations. And, it certainly, so I feel blessed in the one way, but where I find some of the trauma that I experienced more so in my teens, external to my family, was deeply impactful. And one of the exercises I did when I went through counseling, and I've never talked about this, and I'm pretty much an open book, is an exercise where they said, go back to this point in your life in your mind and let's examine this time in history. And I'm sure you've probably seen these exercises before. I found that I went back to when I was 17. I went back into even a little bit before that, and I found that to be an incredibly powerful experience to go back as Rob Jamieson now, what I know now, and before I was a police officer, and talk about that period in your life here, and here. And I found that was probably something that impacted me more greatly than anything that ever happened when I was a youth. So I was fortunate that way. Yeah, James. Yeah.
See, it's such an interesting conversation because there are two sides to it. If we have struggles and they are not addressed, it can be a detriment. It can be a fracture to our foundation. If we have struggles and we address it, I truly believe it can be a strength. It can be true resilience that we talk about. It creates, strength. It creates empathy, all these areas. And so having the conversation at the front door in the first responder professions, the same way as you would with PT, say, if you're here now, if you've put your hand up and said, I will serve when so many didn't, there's a good chance that there are some things that happened prior to this that have created this path for you. So we're going to start talking about it from day one. And we're going to get you to realize that if we talk about it and we work through it, this will be an asset, the same way as your marksmanship and your fitness and all these other things will be an asset. But if we just do the box checking psych test once and then basically say, okay, well, they're not a lunatic, we're good, then we're completely missing this conversation at the front door to really hit mental health from day one.
I think that's a really good point. And in 2019, so we haven't quite got to it yet, but in 2015, I was 10 years ago. This is like my second day on the job as president and CEO of the largest police union in Canada. And I sort of got there through an absolute upheaval of the association in 2015. And a lot of it is searchable online. The National Police Force executed a search warrant on March the 6th, 2015. And there were some vacancies, shall we say, for president and vice president and the CAO of our corporation. And I ran, and I was a platoon sergeant in the academy, running leadership coaching and running all the sexual assault, domestic violence courses, and then recruit instructor. But then I went back on their own as a team leader and got into this position of president. And it was interesting getting in at that time. Just what you're talking about with regards to stigma, some of what you're talking about as well as stigma, and sort of fast forward, the program that I designed with our team and led the implementation of, what you're seeing now with recruits that are coming on is they're immediately getting a baseline, many of them now. And so the stigma has reduced in such a way and supports have increased in such a way. So in 2019 with our team, I negotiated unlimited psychological supports for our members and their families. And it has just been a massive run on this. We had caps before, sort of $1,500 a year, $3,500 a year. When I first got in, it was $1,500, $50 a half hour. The average session's $200 an hour, Canadian. And so we were upside down $100 each time. So, would you have utilized those supports? Then we changed it to $3,500 and $75 a half hour. And then we just blew the doors off after 2018, after experiencing 3 suicides within 3 weeks of OPP officers. We went into 2019 and we just blew the doors off it. But as a result of that, and speaking about mental health and suicide and trauma and all these things, and as the president of the union, I had a platform for which I could discuss some of these things, discuss stigma, and get it out there and start talking somewhat personally and professionally. But one of the great things now, like I was saying, though, and to tie in with what you were saying, is we have so many people now that are reaching out, and it is so great to see, and I give them so much credit. And much of what we have today has been inspired by the widows, by their families, by our members, and then the courage of those that make the call to our mental health program to take advantage of those services, which they rightly deserve.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to want to walk through back to that point, but let's go back to early life. What were you playing and doing as far as sports and exercise back then?
And what, in high school type thing?
Yes.
James, or?
Yeah. School age.
Yeah, so I grew up playing hockey, which probably doesn't strike you as strange, I guess. And I also refereed hockey. I refereed a lot of hockey. And I was always at the rink. I'd work at the rink, and so those sorts of things. My brother was an all around athlete. I just played hockey and did the best I could, and had this really strong friend group. So I was always doing something. It was always sort of team sports the whole way through. Obviously, I think in life, maybe you appreciate those sorts of things more the older you get, and you reflect and you go, yeah, that certainly did have a huge impact. Certainly, some of my friends, myself, it gave us structure, opportunity, physical education, positive mental health, camaraderie. And then one of the reasons why I decided I wanted to become a police officer is I was starting to referee hockey at a higher level. And I enjoyed being able to participate in sport, but at the same time, I enjoyed the refereeing or the officiating aspect of things. And it was sort of a natural kind of bridge to then becoming a police officer. Yeah.
Well, speaking of becoming a police officer, when you were in the school age, was that what you were already thinking of? Was there another career in mind at the time?
I wanted to be a conservation officer. So I'd work for our Ministry of Natural Resources. So it just, at the time, it was tough to get in there, and basically being a game warden and being out. I loved outdoors. I went to university for outdoors. I was a cottager. I loved to fish. I never was into hunting. I never grew up with that, but I'm around a lot of family and friends that do, and totally respect that. And so it was, that's what I wanted to do. But changing into the sort of a career direction a little bit, I found being sort of a rural police officer, small town police officer, highways, rural, that sort of thing. I still was around many of the same things and worked alongside some of the conservation officers over the years. So it was still a really, really good fit, Yeah.
So walk me through the kind of front door for law enforcement for you then.
Well, I went to university. I got involved near the, years 3 and 4. And my roommate, who was a Paralympian, he had cerebral palsy, and he was a Paralympian for Canada. And really was one of the inspirations of my life, being his caregiver. He's a solid dude, and just a really good guy, really life changing. And I got into student politics. I was the president of my student union while I was at university. And at that time, we were the last university in the province. My brain's going back a few years here, that didn't have a health plan for its students. We were the only ones. And I said, that's something we need to remedy. So we worked together, and we brought it in for 93, 94. And we then became, and to this day, that program is still there. It's flourished. I brought in a food bank as well that year, which at the time, a lot of people were, why do you need this and this and this and this? And I think that's really what leadership is. I think leadership is looking at opportunities where there are gaps. And I don't like to do things a mile wide and an inch deep. I like to do things. I like to look at it. It's one of my strengths is I can see something for what it is, see the gaps, see where the rubber meets the road. How does that affect the people? And we push through. In the food bank today, this food resource center that it has grown into today at Lakehead University is phenomenal. So I think what you do today, one of the indigenous teachings that I was taught as well was what you do today affects the next 7 generations. And I truly believe that. I truly believe that. It's like skipping a stone. And so, for me, leadership's always about that. It's always about servant leadership, and it's always about stepping up and providing for others. And that's honestly what fuels me. I love doing that. It's the only reason I do any of these leadership capacity positions that I take on. It's the only reason I do it. I just love doing it. Yeah.
So as far as the journey into law enforcement, what were the conversations as far as mental health when you first entered, and then any other areas that would be startling now listening?
I think most of it would be startling now. It's startling to me it's startling to me when I reflect, and especially retiring and having my retirement bash, just in September, and seeing some of the photos up there and stuff. And it's unbelievable how far we come in such a short period of time. There were virtually no supports for us in 1995. And it's certainly not to say that there were not good people, but there's also an expression that some people agree with, hurt people. And a lot of the times it's this lack of, 10 years ago, even when I became president, there was a real lack of awareness or acknowledgement. This has really been a sort of a sliding scale, a crescendo that's continuing to happen, where more knowledge, more support, less stigma, less judgment is sort of where we're going in some areas, and in other areas it's actually quite regressive. And then you start talking about different things about. So when you reflect in 1995, to your question, just the way in which. I went to university. I have a degree from Lakehead University, which is one of the smallest universities in the country. It's in outdoor recreation and geography. So, when I went to school, I was heated up by my roommate who was an engineer, and my other one was a physical education, and everyone else and stuff. But what that program taught me was leadership. But one of the things that you did not do when you went to detachment in 1995, because you're senior guys, because women didn't come on the OPP until 1974. So these guys were from the 60s. So the last thing they want to hear from you is that you went to university. Okay, that is just not something that you talk about. And so those sorts of things, when you flip the script today and you look at today, people are talking about, yeah, I have my master's in this and this and this and this, and they can say those things and they can talk about the value behind those things. And I'm not one that also is, I'm not a credentialist to the point where certain credentials are critical and that sort of thing. But when I was a recruit instructor in 2013 to 15, at that time, we had several members coming out of our Canadian Armed Forces that had been in Afghanistan. And they came on the Ontario Provincial Police. And I had the honor and the privilege of being there for some of them, their cadre, their recruit instructor, their sergeant. And many of those men and women that had joined the ranks at that time, some went to college, some went straight out of high school into Afghanistan and the Canadian Armed Forces. And I'll tell you, and I quote my friend Eva Olson, who's 101, who's a Holocaust survivor of World War II, and she talks about not having education throughout her life, but she goes, "I have a PhD in life." And I think many of these Canadian Armed Forces, God love them, past, present, and future, have a PhD in life, and I would take them hands down. So I tend to look at the person, what their experiences are and credentials. And that was lacking when you came on to some degree in 1995 with some of the people, and certainly no mental health supports. I remember, and I tend not to do trauma dumps when I talk. I tend to talk in generalities because I never want to, you never know what people's triggers are. So, and sometimes when you describe things maybe in a little bit more specificity than is required. So October 13th, I remember where I was, and a young girl was on the highway, was involved with an accident. She died in front of me. And I remember that night going home, and I had just moved to London, and I was on the couch. I was living in one of the detectives' houses, and I was by myself, and I was curled up in the fetal position and watching the event on the news. And I just remember I was a mess, and there was nothing. And it was just the worst thing in the world to go through. And it took me years to come to terms with the fact that happened. It wasn't, and it took me a while too to realize that it was also not my fault. I had nothing to do with the situation, but I was there. And just by the mere fact that I was there, there was absolutely nothing. There was nothing for folks like us when we came on. Now, if that same thing happened today, there's much more awareness, support. Not to say that people always get it right, but certainly debriefings and critical resources that are available, plus all the supports that we have fought for in the association. So I mentioned that we negotiated unlimited psychological supports in 2019. We also negotiated unlimited workplace insurance supports as well. So when you were diagnosed with PTSD, it used to be a 2-year window. We blew the doors off in 2019 of that as well, and it's unlimited now. So you don't have to, when you start looking at trauma and you start looking at PTSD and PTSI and OSI, TBI, whatever you want to call it, when you start putting timelines on the recovery of those injuries, it just doesn't work that way. It just doesn't. So anyways. I could go on, and I certainly don't. I don't want to run on at this, but yeah, that's kind of where we were at in '95, and it's taken years and years and years of, really in the last 10 years, some serious rolling up the sleeves and saying we need to do better. And we were in a position. I was in a position as president to do something really special that has just gone viral, and thousands of people now have used this program. And like I said, it's one of the most integrated and comprehensive mental health programs I have seen. And I know that's a bold statement, but I hope by today and talking with you, other people who may be experiencing these sorts of things in their workplaces, or whether it's suicide or trauma or mental health or whatever, some of those folks might be leaning into this saying, well, how did they do this? How did he do this? So hopefully it helps. That's the idea.
When you said hurt people, which obviously that's a phrase used a lot now, and beautifully in the opposite of that is heal people, and I agree with that completely. Yeah. But that old salty generation, that was the problem. Is I think that they were hurting themselves. Like you mentioned, a lot of our predecessors were Vietnam era, for example. So if they had served, they're bringing all that back now. Then they're going to become a cop or a firefighter, and it's left unaddressed. Then you have the pendulum swing all the way the other way, where you've got paper tigers in these positions now, and all they want is degrees. And I think that, where we need to be is in the middle, just like you said. Of course, promoting education is an absolute must. Now, it would be great to have degrees that really added value to our professions rather than business administration or whatever the thing is. It's a vague relationship at best. But also really valuing that hands-on experience, that leadership, that ability to work in a team, the problem solving, all these actual attributes that we need, rather than just saying either A, like you said, you need to be a salty World War II veteran, or you need to have a master's degree to be a leader. And I think that middle ground hopefully is where the pendulum will rest.
Yeah, I think that's a point really well taken, and I think that's where. When you look at where we are at today and how far we have come, and I'm specifically talking about our organization, we have the commissioner when Commissioner Thomas Carrique, who's the president of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, he's the top cop in the country, he became our commissioner in 2019. And I found that, and I've been very public about that, coming in 10 years ago, part of the problem too, and there are some that may not like what I say right now, and there's some that have not liked what I say in the past, but it's okay. I came from the outside after the scandal in 2015. I never really talked about this stuff before because I had my head down trying to lead us out of the depths of the organization that we were in. When I started 10 years ago, negotiations had been broken down, benefits had been broken down. We had no relationship with our commissioner and senior leaders, none. We had no relationships with our premier, which is like your governor. And senior leaders and bureaucrats in the government at the time, none. Our membership had zero trust in their association, and rightly so. So walking in, we had no strategic plan for I walk in on day one, I said to Leanna, who's the executive assistant to the board and the president, who's an awesome human being, I said, do you have your strategic plan? I can't find it on the website. And it's like, now just imagine, this is the largest police union in the country, right? With tens of millions of dollars in assets, 6,000 uniform members, 4,000 civilian members of law enforcement, 5,000 retirees, 1,000 surviving family members. And the most recent strategic plan we had was from 8 years prior. 8 years. Where's your roadmap? What are you doing? So for me, coming into an organization, it had some really, really amazing people in the organization. We just had to put it all together and to lead it. And where we are today is night and day. But having said that, it was a hell of an undertaking. I'm being elected twice, and then with 5 years, I would have loved to have continued on in the position, but it had to go to somebody else. So, yeah, no, it's just to kind of get back to your question there, finding that middle is, I think, and I was talking about how the commissioner had come in. Sorry, I don't mean to digress. Is he had the mindset at the time. He was the type, we had gone through 5 commissioners in 6 to 7 months from the time of the summer of 2018 in August/September when I was president, 3 members of the Ontario Provincial Police died by suicide. We went through 5 commissioners from that time until April. Okay. So you can imagine that's taken the last 3 years to get our association sort of up and running and leading and bringing depth and services. And we still had a lot more work to do because the association was in such a tough spot at the time. And our primary goal and role is to provide support, leadership, and services to the people that we represent. So how do you do that? And the other thing I said is there was a ton of conflict. We had over 100 grievances when traditionally we would have a handful. So there was all kinds of internal conflict, and it just tore me up because I'm like, this is not what we should be doing. So I brought this different approach where I want to work, not like this, not like this. I want the union. I want the people running the organization. We need to have these relationships because at the end of the day, we both have the privilege to serve the same people, and we have to get it right. Because when we don't get it right, and if we're not talking to each other, I would rather be on the inside of the boardroom than be on the outside of the boardroom looking in. And I asked our people, I said, listen, I came in from the outside. There was a lot of people there that had been in the association for a long period of time. I said, trust me on this approach. And that's where we went. And it took a lot of work to sort of change the way in which we act, reason, and conclude. And we too have to come to the table. We too have to be accountable. And that's what we did. And you should see where we are today. We've come light years and we have incredible supports and services. But finding that middle ground, a lot of that was done through hard work with our organization, but it was also done through the leadership of the commissioner that finally came in April of 2019 by the name of Thomas Carrick. And his focus was primarily the mental health and well-being of our people. And I felt, thank God, I have somebody that I have a dance partner because I need one. And you're talking about a mental health crisis in the worst time, in the worst history of the Ontario Provincial Police, which was well in excess of 100 years, and so it needed to be addressed. It was a very scary time. It was a lonely time. And I just remember hearing about the 3rd officer that died by suicide. I was in Ottawa at the time with my vice president, and I then went back to the hotel. I said to the guys on the board, someone has to speak. I don't mind if I want to do it. And I penned a letter, which is in the book that I wrote. And it went out to all the members. I was doing media, and we were starting to talk about the stigma associated with it and, mental health and suicide and everything else. And it just started this huge wave. And it ended with a promise that we would deliver and do more for the people that deserve it. And that's where the Encompass Mental Health Program began. And without going into all that, I guess I would just leave that with you. And obviously, I know you want to explore it some more, but that's kind of where that whole concept came from. And there's a lot of people who deserve a lot of credit for providing me the inspiration to come up with some of these ideas.
I had an interview that I'm actually putting out today as we're recording this with Doug Orchard. And he is a documentary filmmaker, done some incredible films. And his latest one is on private equity firms basically dipping into government pensions. So, state, city, county, federal, and using that money to do all kinds of things to make themselves more money. And at the same time, charging fees. And so reducing these pensions. And what he said is there are unions that are taking money from lobbyists to allow them to do this. And you use the word trust. At the moment, one of the things that really angers me is we have a national union here, IAFF, and there's a new administration now, but they've been in for, I think, 3-4 years now. The current one works in a city that works 24/72, so a 42-hour work week, and there has been zero conversation about why doesn't the rest of the country work the same thing. So you're hearing all these, stories about the human beings that are in this position. I want to be very clear. I believe 100% in the union philosophy. I paid my dues the whole time I was wearing a uniform. But as you seem to get higher up, it becomes politics, and you seem to lose the very mission that you're supposed to be there for, which is for the benefit of the people. So with that all being said, obviously that's my experience of, the fireside and this pension thing that I'm just about to release. When you reflect back now, what was that downward spiral of the previous union that you had that literally resulted in, criminal arrests, and cautionary tale, what would you tell people to make sure that didn't happen? Like, were there any red flags as they were not acting ethically, even though they were representing, as you said, thousands and thousands of people?
Well, that's quite a question, and I think it's very. I think your question is spot on. I'm always cautious, especially when I became president. There was a lot of different investigations. It was obviously internal investigations to look at process, policies, procedures. There was a criminal investigation by the National Police Force, the RCMP, who actually unionized after us. We supported them in that, and so they then took the mantle of the largest in the country. But I've always steered away from some of that stuff, only because when I talk about what it is that I inherited, I say this is how I led, and I talk about that in the book as well. So I'll give you an example. So on day one, I arrive, and it's your typical president's office. It's the biggest office. It's got the nicest views. It's got, you go in and there's tables and you know all that sort of stuff. And for me, I don't really care about stuff like that. And I really think the biggest thing where people can learn is if you're the power of the board of directors. So the president is in a not-for-profit corporation, the president is the spokesperson for the board of directors. So the board always has it within their power to come together and have those conversations about the direction and things that are happening. And so where I come from, on day one, which was yesterday, 10 years ago, I walk into the office. I hadn't been in the office in, maybe 12 years or so. I was a complete outsider. So for me to come into an organization, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, is that for me, it's never about blame. I'm not one of those guys that I think we could run around and blame all kinds of people for all kinds of things. For me, it's about, okay, now we have to prioritize these things that have been made aware, that have been brought to my attention. We're going to get to them. There's deficits, and we're going to fix those things. Just imagine walking in on day one, and I come into my office. Leanna's showing me around, and my desk is just full of gifts. There's maple syrup wrapped in birch bark. There's Mont Blanc pens. There's tickets to the Jays games. There's all this stuff. And I said, what is all this stuff? Well, that's all the stuff that's come in for you. And I said, that's not happening. So we ended up getting rid of that stuff and sending a message that type of culture. So I would say this. I would say, if you truly are there for the people and you're a servant leader, it's not about that shit. It's about being entrusted, being put in by people who are relying on you to provide support, leadership, and services at people's most dire times. And it's not about you. And so when I get in there, I clean that off. Then it became, okay, now we have to pick which vehicle we're going to drive. Okay, well, I don't need anything fancy, right? Give me something I ended up driving a Jeep Cherokee, which is a nice enough vehicle, but it wasn't the excesses of driving like an Escalade or something like that. I don't want any of that stuff. So I really think it starts with everything that you do from the top. How do you emulate that stuff? How do you hold yourself accountable? How do you never forget from where it is that you've come from? And I credit my parents. I credit my indigenous teachings. I credit growing up in a small town. I credit the oath that I took when I became a police officer, and I've never forgot it. And it took a lot sometimes to change some of that culture. And these are things I've never talked about before. And these are things that I had to bury deep inside me that quite frankly pissed me off. But they also fueled me because I knew that the membership, and I'm talking in generalities, were screaming and crying out for ethical leadership. And it took time. And it took a lot of, there were people that would write in and say, I think this is the worst place. I think you're all this. I think you're all that. The typical types of things that you would expect that probably would come in. And in some ways, I kept saying to people, just give us a chance. Just let us work through this. Let us get through this. And we had to start prioritizing all the things. One of the first things we did to kind of tie in with things, and I know your question, it's more so how we moved forward and why we're successful. And this is my leadership style is, I went down to Dallas to pay respects to the 5 officers that were murdered down there. And I flew down with my vice president, and I wore a suit. And we were in a church, one of the churches there. It was hot. I remember it was 100 degrees, and we were in Dallas. And I thought to myself, it always bothered me. So some of the things that when you have a platform, when you do things for the good, I used to always see our association wearing suits to funerals and memorials and stuff like that because they were separate. They were union. And I never agreed with that. I just don't. And I have friends of mine who are presidents of other police unions that wear suits at these events, and I love and respect them, but we respectfully disagree on this issue. And I said to our board at the time, I had to go to a funeral, an RCMP officer out west, and I was in a suit because you're not allowed to march with those that are in uniform. And I was at the ass end of the line, and I remember I could hardly see the police officers at the front, and it was the worst feeling in the world. And we had OPP officers that were there wearing their number ones. And I went back to the board and I said, I didn't want to go in a suit to begin with. And so there was this reluctance a little bit because of the past, not to let the current president lead. Okay. And it got to a point where I said, we have a National Peace and Police Officer Memorial in Ottawa every year, every September. I said, I am going to that in my number one dress. And it's the way we are going to pay our respects to the survivors of law enforcement. And we want to represent, and on that day, we are police officers. And I was met with some pretty interesting conversations. And I remember saying to the one guy, and he said, and I said, I'm going in my number one dress. And he looks at me and he says, well, how are we going to look? I said, underdressed. And it was amazing. The whole board came together. We wore our number one dress, except for our civilian member of law enforcement, who actually is the president right now. And he was fully supportive. So I guess what I'm getting at is that you can look at some of the lessons, not only in the OPP Association, but elsewhere, never forgetting the people that put you in these positions. And quite frankly, using that platform, especially me, who was on the road as a supervisor, who was getting in shit from a command member the month before that because me and my platoon didn't have our hats on at some point. And next thing you know, I'm flying around the province with the commissioner, that's very same person, and other executive members. And, she was nice as could be to me. And it just kind of touches on sanctuary trauma a little bit, but it's a reminder that just stay true to who you are, who put you there, and continue to fight and fill those gaps of leadership. Because at the end of the day, your job is to provide support, leadership, and services and respect, especially to those people who have paid the ultimate sacrifice.
You mentioned about having to rebuild relationships. Obviously, they were looking for, commissioners. I mean, you had that revolving door at that one point. Where I've seen incredible progress in physical and mental health within fire departments is when that communication has been forged. So Pasco County, Plano, Texas, some good examples. Talk to me about how you were able to rebuild not only the trust within your own union, but also the interactions with all these other, politicians and entities that you had to have a good relationship with so that you could actually move these conversations forward.
It's a really good question. So in 2012 to 2014, I was the president of the Alumni Association for Lakehead University, so representing about 60,000 people. So I've always been around politics. I follow it. I follow American politics. I follow Canadian politics. I'll bounce around all different channels to try to find the truth. And it's just something that I always enjoy. And it's always something that there's always areas of opportunity, but I've always been really, really good at engaging with stakeholders. That's my strength. So getting and understanding the value of having those relationships, number one, and who, in fact, you need to have those relationships with, and also prioritizing and understanding what it is that you need to accomplish and how you can leverage those relationships with those specific people to get to where you need to go. So when I first was elected, the Liberals were in power, and policing was not a priority for the government at the time. Although the Minister of Labour, Kevin Flynn, he was pro presumptive legislation. He was actually really, really quite good, and I very much enjoyed his support and working with him and all the other people. But as far as policing, that was at the time when there was a lot of there's a lot of activism, and in the United States, in Canada, and much of what happens in the United States comes across the border. Much of what we are exposed to here is American news and issues. So whatever's happening in the United States, we're not numb to it here. We see it. It happens. So policing was very much in the crosshairs of much criticism. Much of the way that we interacted with the public was under scrutiny, and it was very much an activist government. So we tried to carve out the best relationship that we could with someone that we knew, quite frankly, outside of the mental health and well-being of our people with presumptive legislation, whether it was intelligence-led policing and street checks and all these sorts of things. We knew that, so it was very frustrating. So we did the best we could. The premier now, who's been the premier since he came in 2018, Doug Ford, they came in with a much different approach to policing, where not only was the law enforcement profession much more respected, so philosophically, it became much easier. So just strengthening those relationships, creating and strengthening those relationships, taking your priorities, and then with the internal side of the house, the question that you asked is, I remember coming in 10 years ago, and things were so bad that, it was quite frosty. And I think that the current commissioner of the day would agree. And I actually appreciate why he would feel the way that he felt, quite honestly. And so we had to really work at things and talk about some of the things. So I'll give you an example. So the hearing decisions. So, for example, under the Police Services Act, the former Police Services Act, and I'll try to be as succinct as possible for you as I can with this, because I could talk forever about it. But when an officer gets in trouble under the Police Services Act from internal affairs and a charge is laid and they're held accountable, if they decide to fight that charge, it goes before a hearing officer. That hearing officer is someone who is appointed by a police service, usually retired, as an adjudicator. And it's just like a court trial, but it's a hearing decision basically on labor law. You come in. The OPP's position on that has always been, whatever happens, that hearing disposition gets posted on the intranet. So all 10,000 members of the Ontario Provincial Police on a 2 a.m, wherever they are in the province, can go on there and read about Rob Jamieson and and all the other people associated with stuff. And it stayed on there for 10 years. 10 years. Some services put theirs on the internet, so you can go on there and millions of people can go and look at it, and it's there in perpetuity. I have a huge issue with that. I don't think we start talking about shaming people. Shame is one of the critical pieces, and judgment is one of the critical pieces when you start looking at declining mental health and well-being of our people. And so just imagine, so where I'm tying it into the first commissioner, I said to him, we need a few wins. Throw me something. What are we doing here? Let's have this conversation. So he agreed at the time to take that 10 years and move it down to 5 years. So all those people that were from 5 to 10 years were now gone. 99% of the people that are on those hearing decisions still remain as our employees. It's not like you're firing all those people. So these are people that are still within your employ for the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years. So it's in your best interest, and I would always come back to this. It's a philosophy. I don't have a problem holding myself accountable or someone holding me accountable if that's the case, but it's in the how we do it. And I fundamentally disagree with this. And there's the odd person that, there's a retired adjudicator I ran into him in the grocery store recently, good guy. And he vehemently disagrees with the fact that I reduced all that stuff. And I said to him, just imagine your house, James, and you have a house, and here's the street, and here's the sidewalk, and there's the walkway to your house, and your husband, wife, and you have 2 children. and they're young, and your youngest child who's 9 years of age does something really bad. You take out a two-sided sign, you pound it in just like an election sign on your lawn. On the one side, it says, "This is what Rob did." On the other side, the exact same thing. So every day that child has to go to school, he has to go by that sign and see exactly what he did a year ago, 5 years ago, 9 years ago. Everybody that walks up to that house sees that sign on the way in and on the way out. Everybody that walks by that sidewalk sees what that says from 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Everyone that drives by gets to see this thing. So you start asking yourself, how do we move forward as an organization with the health and well-being of our people when we are shaming people? So it's interesting. When I was in charge of negotiations in 2019, we had a really good relationship, and kind of ties in with, we had everything's been firing on all cylinders for a while now, because we managed to, I get that stuff, and our team gets that stuff, and they appreciate it. And we went into negotiations for the first time with the new government, and they said, "Okay, we're ready to go." And I said, "Well, I'm not." And they're like, "Well, what's wrong?" And I said, "I thought we were good. I thought we had." I said, "We are good. I have nothing but respect for you guys. Love you guys, in the same for us. But I need something from you. There's no sense being friends unless we can give each other something, right?" I said, "I'm not prepared to negotiate with you until you do what?" I said, "Get rid of those names and those hearing decisions. Just get rid of them. Anonymize it. Tell the story without having to shame the individual, so people can go on there and have a look at the behavior and say, if I do this, this is the result." And they said, "You want that?" I said, "You give me that. We can then start having negotiations." They went off. They came back. I forget, it was an hour later. "You got it." This is something that the union had fought for, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years with no success. So it's that whole philosophical change of working with the stakeholders. It's that whole philosophical change of having those relationships with the people who have the power and authority and responsibility, which ones, and then prioritizing and keeping in your mind, and with a valid strategic plan, which then we brought in from 2017 to 2022, we fixed that one as well. And we were off to the races. So it's multifaceted, and it's really knowing who's who, and it's really knowing what it is that your membership needs and why they put you there.
You mentioned about your kind of mental health downward spiral at 2020. Mm-hmm. When you reflect back now, what were some of the calls, warning signs, events prior to that? And then let's talk about that, first time that you put your hand up and truly asked for help.
That's a great question, and it's one that I'm very comfortable in speaking about now. I certainly talk about it in my book. It's when I first got on the job, when I started on the job, I worked in an area where there was outlaw motorcycle gang clubhouse, and a lot of what I did in frontline duties was associated with. I loved engaging with outlaw motorcycle gangs and associates and all that stuff. I loved tracking their movements, intelligence, all that stuff. And they changed, and I was dealing with some pretty bad dudes and I really enjoyed that type of police work. But when you do that sort of stuff, it does come with a cost, and I'll just kind of keep it generic there and put it this way: I survived. I then went into as a platoon sergeant, best job I've ever had in the OPP, as a player coach and taking care of my people. I miss them very much. But they had a program where they come around and they say, "Hey, listen, we need a sergeant from every detachment to go into internal affairs." And they came to me and they said, "It's only a 3-month gig." I said, "I don't want this. I do not want to go. I actually don't think I'm the type of guy that you want in there to begin with." And so, but I had been in crime and I'd done major investigations and stuff. So they were hitting up people and no one else wanted it. And then they came around again and they said, "Listen, we want you to do this. Will you go?" Because you have to kind of be willing to go into something like that. So I went and I talked to a lot of my buddies, my hard-hitting, hardcore dudes, awesome guys, and kind of got the green light and said, "You know what? You can make a difference in there." So I did. And so I went in and I saw immediately the impact of these investigations, how brutal some of them were onto the members and their families by extension. And it just, we had, while I was in there, one of the members that was under investigation by multiple people died by suicide, and that rocked me. And it was that feeling once again that I had dealt with, that I talked about today, which I've never talked about, was the young girl being killed in my presence early on in my career. And then you throw the biker stuff in there, then you start throwing this in, and this is in and around 20, just after 2010. So it's compiling. And then I became an academy instructor. And then I felt like there was, at that time in 2013, I needed to take a couple of months off. And I just remember I was at a conference, and one of our 4 psychologists it was all internal affairs. And he asked a question to everybody. He goes, where do you think PTSD exists within the police forces? And they had representatives from all over the province from internal affairs. And I'm thinking, it actually exists in internal affairs. Like, the ability to feel responsible for the deaths of other people is how I was feeling at that time. And he starts throwing this stuff up on the screen. And this is in 2013. This is 12 years ago, before a lot of this stuff was even talked about. And I just crumbled. And I left the room. I took my gun off. I handed it to my buddy. Not that I was going to do anything to myself. I just knew that I was off work. I said, take this thing. And I went off for a couple of months. And at that time, there was no real supports. There was the guy that I handed my gun to, which is a solid dude. And because he was a solid dude, he was the kind of guy that would reach out. But the whole process kind of winded down. You're off. The system keeps going. The phone doesn't ring. I learned firsthand right then and there. It was pretty humbling to go through something like that. It was pretty awful. I fought my way back. I didn't want to be back in internal affairs because I was still feeling responsible. I went in, I started teaching the recruits, and I loved it because I just felt like I could give back, and it was an area that I loved doing, helping others. Then I was elected, just before I was elected president. I was on scene of a collision as a supervisor. Young woman was killed. We had to make an arrest of her family member. And I just remember it was cold, and everyone else had left, notifications, all that stuff. And it was just me and her at the side of the road. And I just remember saying to myself, I'm done. And this was in 2015. And this was simultaneous to me actually running for the position of president, and actually realizing at the same time. And then I was elected. So where sort of this whole thing has come from. So 2018, imagine taking over this organization with the magnitude, the mental health crisis, losing people to suicide every year, not fully understanding even the supports and services that we offered when I went in there, because I had been out of it for so long, and realizing once I got in that we as a team had a lot of work to do. And there were some people that were pulling this way, there was people pulling that way. And I was like, no, we need to move in the forward direction. We need to do something significant. And we kept, like I said, the first responder presumptive legislation, working with our partners, moving forward, the increased psychological supports for counseling. And then when we lost 3 OPP members in the summer of 2018, I listened to the widows who inspired me. I went to the funeral of one of the members, and I just remember seeing all the disconnects from spouses who wanted to get their husbands the help that they needed, but they were struggling, and that's when I came back and I wrote the membership, the letter I was telling you about, and I was just inundated, and it started this national conversation in many ways, and doing media and getting out there and being scared shitless at the same time, because once you throw yourself out there, I started worrying about, what are people going to think of me and my wife, my kids, what's the impact? Am I going to piss off some of the widows who have gone through the ultimate pain? And it was very well received, actually, kind of coming out. And like I said, I made the promise to them. And that's when I went back to my office. I had listened to the widows, their families, my friends, myself, the association. I closed my door. I went into my office with a blank piece of paper. I pulled out a piece of paper and I said, if money was not an option, what would the best mental health program for first responders look like? And I just sat down. It has to be 24 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 a year. It has to be bilingual. Many of our members that we have are French. They speak French as their primary language. They need to be able to effectively communicate their issues and concerns in the language that they speak. It has to be culturally relevant. They have to understand the culture of the OPP and the OPP Association. They have to understand the culture of people. So we need a diverse group of clinicians who can connect, whether they're racialized, whether they're white, whether they're indigenous, whatever. When you mix those things together, and then it has to have residential treatment, and then it has to have, once you come into this program, we have to have constant touching in with the individuals. So this program has thousands and thousands of emails and phone calls out to the people that are participating in this program. So I designed it with our team over the 18-month period, procured it, we implemented it. And I said in the procurement process, I want you to design this program in such a way that you do the following. When somebody reaches out to you, whether it's 2 p.m. or 2 a.m, I want you, trauma-informed people on the other end of that phone who have access to every resource known to man, wrap your arms around that person and do not let them go. I don't know how you write that in the RFP, but it's got to be in there. So I stayed with it the entire time. Meanwhile, we had more mental health crisis on the go over the 18-month period. I started to become physically and mentally exhausted. I continued to feel responsible for the deaths of the people that I was there to take care of. And in 2020, after the program launched, March 30th of 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, which was ironic, which was incredible because people needed these things, I couldn't get into residential treatment. I went into residential treatment in May for the first time. And as president, very few people knew. And then in November, I had to go in again. And then while I was there, one of our members was murdered, shot to death. And I checked myself out because it wasn't in my DNA. And I went, another member was hurt. So I had to go to the hospital and see him. Didn't had to, I wanted to. And November 30th, 2020, I was done. And then, I was officially diagnosed with complex PTSD. I was out of the workplace for 10 months. And here I went from being the president to out of the workplace and really, 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 really fighting the effects. And I'll tell you, one of the things that helped me through it, of all things, obviously the support of my wife, my children, my counselor, other people who had the strength and courage to stand up. There's a show on TV. So I've had 2 heart attacks. My first one was in 2018 when I had the job. The other one I had was 14 months ago. And, before I retired. And the first one I had in 2018, I started watching a show called SEAL Team. Have you seen that show with David Boreanaz?
I had the guy that plays the dog handler on the show. So I haven't actually seen an episode, but I'm aware of it.
Yeah, the dog handler. He's an actual police officer in real life, I believe. That gentleman.
Yeah, he's a kind of like a canine trainer, not actually a cop, but he helps train canines.
Okay. Yeah, it's that show really, really resonated with me. The way that they handled TBI and PTSD, and so as it went through, it was almost a running timeline to what I was experiencing. And I don't mean to digress on this answer. I'm just saying the way that they handled that at the end of the show, and I don't want to ruin it for people that haven't seen the show. So I don't want to, and it's been out for a long time. So hopefully, but just the way in which they were there for their brother and they stepped up and they weren't afraid. Finally, they were like, we're standing up and we're going to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, be damned the consequences. And that I was in my basement watching this and I was absolutely choked up. And I thought to myself, yes, that's exactly what it takes. It takes a village. And I've said this since day one. It's the old expression, it takes a village to raise a child. But I actually believe that it takes a village your entire life.
Absolutely.
And when I saw that, I thought, well, there's Tyler Gray that brings that, and the other people that are in it that bring that, just the way they did that. And I was like, I bet you there's a lot of people out there that are just like me, that show spoke to them in such a way that gave me such hope. And you got Jason Boreanaz, Jason on the show at the very end when, I hate talking about it because in the sense that I don't want people to, it's been out long enough, but when he goes easy effing day at the very end, and I thought, Right on. Exactly. And I managed to get myself back into the workplace. I managed after 10 months to reintegrate. I managed to get an amazing job where I work with so many United States law enforcement agencies, the DEA, ATF, FBI, Department of Justice, Homeland, out of the Ottawa Embassy, Toronto Consulate, doing really amazing work around and working with some really, really cool people and eventually getting back into the police union. So with enough support, compassion, understanding, no judgment, and you can get there. And so I give a lot of people a lot of credit, and I respect their courage. And I just it's interesting. Shows sometimes people even that do the shows probably don't understand the magnitude of the impact that shows like that can have. But that show there had a massive impact on me in a positive way.
Where was the lowest place you got in this whole time? And then what were some of the tools in that toolbox that help you navigate out?
I think one of the lowest points was while I was still president, and I knew that this program was going to make a massive difference. And it was I don't want to say abuse, but it was the complaints and the criticisms from some and the accusations that the association keeps talking about this program they're going to bring in. And when you're talking about creating something that's never been created before for thousands of people, securing the funding, this stuff's unprecedented. And I give credit to the people that supported me while we did this. But it was awful. I remember being in the boardroom and people coming in and I would think, Jesus, please, please, everybody stay alive until it was just I was just in a horrible place. And so I had to do this job. I was declining. I think once we were able to, so just to give you some context on this program, since its launch March 30th of 2020, we've had up to 4,000 members and their families utilize this program. We've had up to 400 critical crisis response calls. So those are people that are calling up at any given time of the day that are in absolute crisis. In the past, we had a benefits section. We had some people doing some good stuff. But because this was a one-stop shop, 24/7, 365, all that stuff, I would hate to think where we are today. But some of the worst times, but I made a promise to my wife, because when I was in residential treatment, like I said, I was in there with some special forces dudes, they were incredible, military guys, police officers. One was a nurse. They're in the previous cohorts. There would be some firefighters, just the first responder community. But some guys were doing better, some guys were doing worse, or worse off. For me, it was making that promise from the beginning that to my wife that I will survive, I will get through this. And even though there were days when you're fighting it, you get those setbacks. I think some of the worst times was while I was still in the role and just praying to God that no one else would be hurt or died. And once the program has taken off, and it did take off, and it has been a massive success. So I think those were some of the worst times. The feeling responsible for the deaths of other people, and then working through that and understanding that, no, I'm not responsible for the deaths of other people. And now when my head hits the pillow, I think to myself, we have a program that's been in place for 5 years. There is not one thing that is not offered through that program. And our people have unprecedented supports, not only our people, but their families. And we see a huge uptake on their families, huge. And they're critical components to this whole thing as well.
It's amazing how, as you've alluded to before, how crushing organizational betrayal or organizational stress can be. Mm-hmm. And I've found this my last fire department was very much that way, and it was just trying to highlight things that we needed to address, everything from firefighter fitness to simply being able to wear your mask and ascend gear with the weight needed. Pretty basic operational elements. But
Mhm.
now outside doing what I'm doing and trying to push these healthy work weeks, for example, and getting exactly what you're talking about, getting people that you are advocating for pushing back and saying, oh, no, that doesn't work. That's stupid. Da, da, da. And it's like, it's literally solving all the things, and it's going to get you home safely and happy to your family more often.
Mhm.
Why would you push back? Why would you draw a breath to
Yeah.
oppose the thing that we're
Yeah.
trying to address? Where does that come from? Where is that
Mhm.
toxicity bred that would brainwash a police officer or a firefighter to actually oppose the very solution of the crisis that they're facing?
Isn't that a great question? It's one that I've asked myself multiple times. But what was great about it is while I was president, you have that platform. So I really think it comes down to leadership. It's interesting. Some people play 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional chess, whatever they want to call it. I did to a certain degree, but I was more concerned with doing what was right and what was in the best interests of our people, not about what's in the best interest. So listen, I'll just do this amount. So when I retire in June of 2025, I now can go get a job somewhere else because I've managed to keep these relationships that I didn't challenge, you know?
Yep.
And so for me, I was very one dimensional that way. I was very, for those 5 years, that's my servant leadership. That is exactly the way that I operated. And I'm okay with that. I can look at myself in the mirror and I know, when I take my daughters out to, if we're at the grocery store and I run into somebody, 9 times out of 10 or even higher, like I said, I'm great. I don't care who I run into because that's always been my focus. And you're absolutely right. And I think I have a bit of a philosophy, and obviously it's a generalization, but I think it really goes back to, people that want to get into these professions. I think the biggest question people get asked all the time, well, why did you want to become a police officer? And, the standard answer is always, I wanted to help people. And I'm sure that is very much true. But to your point, you've kind of alluded to something earlier about, things that happen within your younger self can also be drivers, positive, negative, otherwise, whatever. And I'm just sort of paraphrasing, and excuse me if I'm putting words in your mouth because I don't mean to, because it's actually what I believe. It When you break it down, some of the people that I've seen in my career, and I've worked with, it's the law of averages. We have some amazing people that we all work with, but some of the people I see that have come on to law enforcement, for example, in particular, the one that I work with, the OPP, their approach, this inflexibility to be a decent human being was lost upon them prior to applying to get on the job, in my opinion. Then when they get on the job, some of these people, some of them who may be narcissists, which to me are some of the most treacherous people going, will do anything they can to take out anybody who they perceive, real or otherwise, to be a threat. And I've gone against those people, and I love that. It's actually what fuels me. I love going against them. And it's because that's why I wanted to become, and many of the people that I know want to become police officers, because you want to stand up against the bully who's taking advantage of people in society, right? That's why you want to become a cop. You want to advocate, you want to protect, you want to serve, you want to do these things. So you don't expect it and you don't see it coming from the inside, especially before these conversations were happening. So when you look back, a guy like myself who just retired after 30 years, you look back, okay, here's the first 10 years, here's the second, here's the third, and you see the evolution. We weren't talking about these things 30 years ago, 20 years ago. Maybe some people were, but generally no one was really talking about this stuff. In the last 10 years, yes, I'd say. In sanctuary trauma, which causes moral injury and injury to the soul. But these same people that get on, and I thought this way years ago, and I look at them and I go, you're now wanting to get promoted because now you realize that self-worth that you are identifying with does not have the same resonance within people who have the exact same authority and responsibilities that you do. I hope I'm making sense.
You are.
And and then so they get promoted for whatever reason. And next thing you know, there's this now For every one of those, I've worked for so many, just like you have, incredible human beings, and I do not want to come across as negative today, but I do want to call stuff out and be factual and say, so that person, one person, as they go up that chain of command, what do? They promote people that are subservient to them or agree with them or won't rock that boat or won't call them out for their absurd, offensive, abusive behavior. And that's what I loved about the police union, because my philosophy is that I'll work with the commissioner and the deputies and all the other people, and we can and we have really strong relationship, and I'm really proud of that approach. But part of that comes with conversations that say, and I know that this person here at this detachment, who's detachment commander or someone else, I'm just using generic terms because most are amazing. And I know that they should never be around other human beings. That. They probably would be good. So when I was running leadership coaching in the academy, it was for staff sergeants who would get paired with inspectors and superintendents. And some of the people who were extremely problematic at detachment levels for whatever reason, whether it was because they were a narcissist, whether they're abusive, whether they're power hungry, or whether they're just unable and unwilling to be a decent human being. But if you gave them an administrative assignment, what I saw is some of them were just rocking those because that's actually where they excelled. So what we need to do is we need to get better at saying to people, we can send you on all the leadership courses in the world. Some people, and this is my own opinion, you could send them on leadership coaching for the rest of their career, and that guy's not changing. The only thing at the end of the day, you can give everybody the opportunities to do that. You can mentor them. You can do all these things. But at the end of the day, sometimes you have to say, for the sake of all the others, I think this is probably a better opportunity for you. You bring somebody in that's dynamic, that's leadership, that cares for their people, that treats their people with respect, that holds them accountable, but in the how, and never takes away someone's dignity. To me, it's not hard. I don't know why these people struggle with this stuff. I don't get it, but some do, and they cause a lot of harm within the organizations that we both have been part of, for sure. Yeah.
It just is a realization for me the last probably year and a half, where you and I, and so many other people have been talking about mental health for a long time now, at least relatively compared to most of the population. And when we talk about it, we're like, well, it's the James, it's the Robs, it's the people on the street, doing the job, wearing the uniform. And we forget that applies all the way to the top. And a good example is like if you are the head of a tobacco company or Purdue Pharma or a weapons manufacturer, and you sleep soundly at night knowing that you're profiting from things that are killing Americans, Canadians, whoever it is, you are a sociopath. Like you just are. There's no justifying it at this kind of level. And it's the same in police and fire and EMS. If you, for example, locally are in charge of a fire department that has had 5 suicides in as many years and several more that were never revealed, and then most recently now had a fire station haze someone to the point where 4 firefighters were arrested, and you just stand on a podium and say, oh, it's all their fault, it's the same exact thing. And this is what we have to have a conversation, is it is so dangerous to have a narcissist or arguably a sociopath wearing a union president's suit, a fire chief's, class A, whatever it is, that are in charge of all these people. And I think that going back to the kind of initial conversation is this then creates a culture of hurt people that then creates that stigma that has our police officers and firefighters afraid to say that they're struggling. And then we go and attend yet another funeral with a flag draped coffin while the bagpipes play. So it is such an important conversation.
100%. And that's exactly why, with our commissioner that came on in 2019, like we were the first police force, the OPP in Canada, to actually have a place of reflection, a suicide memorial place of reflection at headquarters, which was, really progressive. I know Toronto has since got one, and there's much more recognition, but really, and rightly so. But really, these are leadership issues. This is so fundamentally, in my mind, simple. It's how we treat other human beings. And I just keep using, so I was, the philosophy that Commissioner Carrique and myself as president, we had, was we were able to, I hope, and I think if you chat with folks, create a culture where it's much easier to come forward. The resources are there. The accountabilities have to be there. So I think it's really important too that when you have, see, it was interesting. I've never heard of anybody coming from internal affairs to the head of the union. Like it's just not something that happens. I didn't really see myself getting in. I didn't want to go to internal affairs, and I didn't see myself ever becoming the president of the police association. But for whatever reason, they both did. And well, I know some of the reasons why they did for presidents, because I said, you know what, I can do better than that. And we did. But it really comes down to leadership, and it really, whatever position that you hold, I would even say you don't necessarily have to hold a position of authority and responsibility like a hierarchy, like a president. I think it comes down to those senior people or any person on a platoon. Whether it's a shift sergeant, whether it's the junior member, whether it's, everybody has something to contribute. And I think everybody can be a leader for the better from whatever position that they come from. But ultimately, people have to be setting that tone from the top. And you see today examples all over the place where that isn't the case. And I go to conferences where, up until the time I retired, I would go to conferences and the room would be packed with people, and people would get to the microphone and they start asking questions, and I would just sit there, and it just blows my mind the examples that exist still. It blows my mind the lack of resources and support that exist. There's no consistency for everybody. So not everybody has unlimited psychological supports. Not everybody has a Factor 85 pension for their civilians. Not everybody has unlimited WSIB benefits. Not everybody has a concierge one-stop shop service. Very few people have that stuff. So, I think that's, once again, when you take on these roles and when you achieve these things, it shows others that it's possible. It shows others, when you speak with vulnerability in a position of leadership, that it's okay to come forward. And I think it's okay when you're in a position of authority and responsibility, like I was, to call some of these bastards out. But once again, for me, it was always in the how I did it, and it's really, so when you have relationships with all these political leaders, like I do, all the bureaucrats, the ones that you need to have relationships with, the commissioner, the deputies, and all the other people, all the people across the province, when you have a lot of relationships with those people, when this person who may be in charge of something over here hopefully is smart enough to clue in that the head of the union is actually on really good terms with your boss's 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 boss, and all the way down, that generally, from my experience, if they're acute enough or astute enough, should send the message that, you know what, you may want to act in this regard, but if you do, be very careful, because you will be held accountable. And you might not even know where it's coming from when you are.
Yeah. No, I think that's, that's what we need to do. I mean, I think where I really struggle is just like you said, you got to call some of these bastards out. I'm a nice bloke. I really do believe that. And I want to just go on and, just enjoy, if I was still in the uniform, enjoy the profession and be around crews that have got their physical fitness and their mental health and everything's, squared away. And we can just focus on, evolution as far as technology and training and knowledge sharing. But as pointed out, if not me, then who? Who the hell is just going to say this isn't working? Like, fundamentally, the way you're doing it isn't working. And if you look in, I'm sure you've heard it in law enforcement, in fire especially, like, we have an immense recruitment crisis, an immense retention crisis. People aren't staying their full, 20, 25 years, a lot of them. And at what point do you take ownership and say enough is enough? And how many funerals do we need? Like, I've said this like tongue in cheek. Well, give me a number. How many dead firefighters do we need for you to start fucking changing? All right, we'll just, any volunteers to make that number? All right, now we're good. Now we're going to change. So this
Yeah.
is what's so maddening. I was trying to articulate what I was trying to say, but is it's the ones that did the job for the right reason that get so angry about this. Because as you said, it's the
Mhm.
bullies that we're up against. It's the cowards. And, when you care about human beings to the point where you will kiss your wife or your husband goodbye and, hug your kids and then walk out the door for 12 or 24 hours to go and risk your life for a complete stranger,
Mhm.
then if the environment is so toxic that the very men and women that you adore to the left and your right of you are dropping like flies because of that, and the people that go home at 5 o'clock every night and sleep in their own bed with their family are pushing against the solutions, then yeah, you
Mhm.
have to dip your knuckles in glass and you got to start swinging. That's just what.
Mhm.
So this is the thing: is like it's not coming from a place of empty criticism. It's just
Mhm.
we tried the softly, gently approach, and you didn't fucking listen. So
Yeah.
now, as you said, you got to call some of these people out, and you don't want to add shame, but sometimes shame is what needs to happen. And locally, right now, I hope to God there's finally a spotlight put on the lack of leadership that's causing all these issues here and all these deaths. Because again, how many people have to die before you change? And if the answer is there aren't enough, then you do not deserve to be in that position.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that's why it's absolutely critical. Ours is called an association, but a police union in our profession, same as fire or whatever else. I think that's why those relationships in these associations are so incredible. It's incredibly important. The power that associations. So I was on as a director for the Canadian Police Association as well, so the national body for 3 years, and I can tell you, our national president, Tom Stamatakis, he's dialed in all over the country, and I just think if you have, and for me, it was great because I could come in after being away for so long, and quite frankly, I just said this is where we need to go. I didn't have to work my way up in the sense of having to befriend this person, that person, whatever. And I'm not suggesting that's how others got there. But what I am saying though is that I think it's really critically important, these unions and police and the associations in the first responder community, because the difference that you can make if you make these relationships. I've worked with other police association executives where I see that they're having trouble within their respective services, where they're not getting the respect that they deserve. And we've had fireside chats and we've talked about relationships and how some of these people that get in these positions are narcissists, but they also there's some ego in there too. So if you use that and you say, okay, this person in this service, and like I said, most of the people that I deal with, and I keep saying these disclaimers because it's true, they've always been decent to me. I see them as many, but not all are. And so you're able to take these people and use their egos against them. So all of a sudden, when they see that your friends, and I'll go into it again, as a police association president, when you're friends with, okay, who's that person's area of influence? Who do they directly, indirectly sort of report to, respect, all these sorts of things? Now go out and be friends, if not even better friends with those people. And you watch what happens. You watch how all of a sudden, boom, because they will look at you and they say, they'll be able to function. You don't even have to be overbearing about it. You just have to work your way into that circle and do these different things in a professional capacity. And you have to my mom always says to me, she goes, you just have to out-reasonable other people. And as soon as they look around, and most of them are smart enough to go, oh, wait a second, why is he or she with that person? Ooh. And you can force that behavior change. And so I love working with association people that have come to me. And my advice is always, we have these conversations and these firesides, and some of them have employed those, I would say tactics, but that way of being. And all of a sudden, I see now, and there's one particular example I'm thinking of right now, where all of a sudden, within a short period of time, guess what? They have this. I see all these pictures where they're together now. I see all these pictures where, they've got this incredible relationship now. And a lot of that was born from that person's hard work in developing those relationships with those people that are influential to the person that you're having that discord with. And so I think when one door closes, association leadership is absolutely critical to the component of this, but where one door closes, I always enjoy the challenge of finding out, okay, which door are we going to go through to leverage those relationships to bring this person in line with treating people the way that they should be treated and never taking away the dignity of another human being. So that's, to me, that's always been my response and my answer, and it works.
Absolutely. Well, I want to hit one more area, and I'd love to actually summarize, what you've created, you collectively have created as far as the mental health resources in your area. But
Yes,
you've alluded a few times now on the indigenous population. And it's been interesting because that's not actually even a group that I'm able to really get guests from very often. I don't know if there's an element of distrust or what it is. But several people I've reached out just didn't come back. So sadly, I'm usually listening to, more often than not, law enforcement officers. Sometimes it's a, fire paramedic. Mm-hmm. But you do hear a lot of the struggles in some of these communities, the alcoholism, the domestic violence. And if we talk about moral injury and loss of tribe, well, I mean, that's a very specific label in some of these areas. Some of these people's cultures were literally, there was an attempt to smite their entire existence off the face of this continent. So talk to me. I mean, again, it can be the highs, it can be lows, whatever it is. But what are some of the things that people need to know about Indigenous populations in Canada, as far as through your lived experience?
Wow, even to know where to start to answer something like that, first off, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, right? And I found from my experiences, and this is just me, I went to university in Thunder Bay. We had a small Indigenous community in Port Perry, the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, where I'm from. And, I had known some folks from that community, but certainly growing up, going to a university, at that time, it was about 10% where it was First Nations, Inuit, and Métis persons that attended university. And there's a significant Indigenous population in Thunder Bay and surrounding areas. So when you go to Thunder Bay, it's very much Thunder Bay, and I love it. And at university, though, when I got into student politics, I was talking earlier, I represented at that time an organization called the Lakehead University Native Student Association, and it was called Loonside. I'm not sure what it's called today. And I became really good friends with a woman by the name of Linda Henry, and who's with the Creator now, and God bless her. She was incredible. But we really got along awesomely. Like, it was just, when I was done in May of '94, we went home to her home community, a place called Frenchman's Head, Lac Seul First Nation, which is in Northwestern Ontario. And I was there for a few days and on a reserve. I'd never had spent any significant time on a remote reserve before. And I was hanging out with her and her family. And then, I mentioned earlier I didn't hunt, but, I went out one day with her family and we went out hunting. And, it was basically, it was sustenance hunting. We were out, we got some ducks, we brought them back, cooked them on the open fire, and we walked through the community. And I talk a little bit about this in my book. It was such an incredible, overpowering experience. We found an eagle feather underneath an eagle's nest, and she got that for me, and she beaded it. And actually, I have it. Excuse me. I just happen to have it with me, actually, right here. This is my office a lot of the times. So she made this for me, and and had wrote on that, "Faith, if you take good care of this gift, guaranteed it will take good care of you, your friend Linda." And as you can see, like I said, this is complete. She did the beadwork, and then you've got your eagle feather. This eagle feather is 31 years old, and it has been with me to so many different places of ceremony, and given me strength in times when I've needed it. And at that time, she started telling me about residential schools, and I didn't know anything about that. It was nothing that we were ever taught. And she was, like so many other people, she was a little bit older than I was, so she would tell me stories about, them putting sort of needles in her tongue so she wouldn't speak Ojibwe, and trying to stop her from speaking her language. And she would tell me these things at the time. This was in 94. The last residential school in Canada closed in 1996.
Crazy.
So, I learned from her firsthand, and her family, who shared some stories with me that I'll just keep them with me. But they, it was never lost to me. So when I worked the highway, I had the opportunity when I first got on the job. There was Chippewa, Munsee, and Oneida, and there were 3 separate communities together outside of London, Ontario. And I would often find myself in the community, supporting the community, supporting First Nations officers who worked in those communities. And so in every community, obviously is different. It's like any other community that's out there. But the one thing that is always true is respecting your elders and listening more than you speak. And so I remember one day there was a red-tailed hawk that had been on the highway. Sometimes the birds of prey get wrapped up in, like, if a tractor trailer goes by, it gets caught in the wind and it breaks its neck, and it's sort of lying there. But the bird was in beautiful shape. And I was in uniform, and I drove up to the community, and the chief of the reserve came out of the territory. And I just remember I'd never met him before. And I said to him, I want to give you this. And he was really simple. It was just like, thank you for thinking of my people. And really I credit that small experience with the cultural understanding, with the teachings that I had received from my friend Linda and her community and people. And so I really think that's what a lot of, I've always been very, very, it's funny, at my retirement, my buddy Vinny, who's, he retired as well. We were classmates, and he was talking about the first time he ever met me, and I was smudging sweetgrass in 1995 in the residence in Brampton. And he was telling this story, and I not that I forgot about it, I just hadn't thought about the story in a long time. And the commissioner's there, and my family's there, everybody else, and all my buddies, and they're listening to this story. And that's how I became friends with my lifelong friend, Vinny. And he's just a superhuman being. But we met through that, and by smudging, and he could smell it. And who knows, I may not have met him the same way and had the same relationship, right? So I think when we open ourselves up to the fact that there are different experiences and histories, some of which are not written in textbooks, and you listen to people, I think it helps us not only be better at our jobs, but I think be better human beings. And then, I just think when you're talking about these sorts of things and the experiences that I've had, to answer your question, it would take probably a long time to be able to talk about. I was fortunate. So when I was in the academy, I then had a secondment. At that time, it was called the Aboriginal Policing Bureau. It's not, they don't use the word Aboriginal anymore. It's Indigenous. But I had the honor of being a part-time firekeeper at Sweat Lodge ceremonies, because they took our officers and civilians for 5 days up to a place called Nottawasaga, Ontario, at Samuel Champlain Park at that time. And they would have Sweat Lodge ceremonies, and being, facilitated by one of the elders. And I worked with another Indigenous male, a great guy, who I assisted him in being a non-Indigenous person like I am. These teachings still are so valuable. And so fast forward to, any community. So I then had the honor of going up to another community called Pikangikum First Nation. And it's very remote. It's fly in, or you drive in the wintertime on the ice road, or at that time you take a boat to get in there. And it has really interesting dynamics there. And I've been there 4 times. They usually fly us up at 2-week intervals. Many officers have in the OPP. And it's supplemented the supports provided to that community. And once again, it's just some of the challenges that you find in some of the communities when we hear things that are very that are stated very ignorantly by people. And I have no problems calling that out, even if it's amongst people that I love and respect. And, when you look at the residential school system and you look at the prohibition of culture, tradition, ceremony, language, and you look at the imposition, the intergenerational trauma, when you look at what I said earlier about the elder who told me, what you do today affects the next 7 generations, is also the elder that was running the sweat lodge ceremonies for our people. And so I think when they talk about reconciliation today, we have a very strong Indigenous Policing Bureau today in the Ontario Provincial Police. It's just come light years. There's been some incredible leadership. A friend of mine is the commander of the Indigenous Policing Bureau. Good guy, extremely knowledgeable, extremely well respected, and just a source of incredible information. And so I think I'm proud to be part of an organization that has come that far. For me, it's always, and that's why that's one of the reasons why when I sat in my office and I was talking about the culture of the organization, a lot of that cultural appreciation comes from my teachings from Linda and from other Indigenous people that I've had the privilege to meet and to listen to. And so when you start blending that, so you just have to, you realize that, especially when you're in these positions, so, as a white male, yeah, I'm the president, but I represent people that from all different walks of life, and all different belief systems, all different religions, all different, there's so many different things that are happening, but there's also a lot of commonalities. And so I think from that perspective, I'm proud to see where the OPP has gone. I'm proud to see where the OPP Association has gone. Is there work to do? Absolutely. There's still always more that can be done. But I've actually, anytime I've ever been on Indigenous territory, having the privilege to police there, I've actually always felt probably the most comfortable, to be honest, and nothing but respect for the communities and the elders, and really, 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 really positive interactions. I think sometimes people, it's easy, and I've heard these generalizations. People have generalized, this community or that community. Well, you show me a community outside of an Indigenous community that doesn't have, take any small town. There's politics. There's services that aren't being delivered. Sometimes there's behavior that's happening within a non-Indigenous community that's unacceptable. So to think or to try to hold other people or communities to the same level that you're not holding other people to, I think that's a starting point or a jump off point to say, you know what, take a good look in the mirror. So I think, to answer your question, I think that's kind of always been my way. And I tell people, go out and experience these things for yourself. Go meet some people. Go listen to some people.
Absolutely. Well, before we go to closing questions and talking about your book, just give me the bullet points of that encompassing system that you guys have now, so that people listening can understand, all the different tendrils of this, these resources that they have available to them in your law enforcement agency.
Yeah. So the whole purpose of the book, for me, it's multifaceted. First and foremost, all the proceeds go to organizations, survivors of law enforcement, which includes many women whose husbands were killed in the line of duty. The second organization is Canada Beyond the Blue. So they support families, bringing supports and services to those, bringing awareness to those who have died as a result of the line of duty, suicide. and Boots on the Ground, which is a support organization as well. So first, I think it's really important to say that first and foremost. The other purpose of writing the book was to explain sort of what we dealt with and what we were faced with, how we dealt with it, and then the result of it. And so say you're having a problem in the United States in some fire hall or region or police or paramedic or first responder, military, whatever, you can take this book and you can, it's like a 2-hour read. And you can look at and see how we handled that. And some of the stuff I've talked to you already today about, but the gist of this book is our commissioner of the Ontario Provincial Police, Thomas Carrick. I was saying he's the president of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, well respected, top cop in the country as far as I'm concerned, does the foreword to the book. And then chapter 1 is one of our widows whose husband died by suicide on the job. And so then from there, just a little bit about my background, but it's weaved in such a way that I wanted to write this book with my writer, Laurie Stevens. And I mention her name only because and for the primary reason is that I couldn't have written this book by myself. And so respect to her. And she did her work pro bono as well on the betterment of the first responders. And then it basically talks about coming into and becoming a police officer and some of those experiences, but then becoming president and then coming into the 2018 suicide crisis and what I was facing as president and we were facing as an association and the void that I had to, and I talked about this earlier, we had to move forward in many ways on our own because we went through 5 commissioners within that period of time, and initially we were working with a commissioner in 2018 who later retired, and then there's 5 of them. That's unprecedented in an organization in the midst of the worst suicide and mental health crisis facing the organization. And anyone can argue that with me all they want. There's no argument. So our response to it was, and as I was mentioning, is basically we needed to come up with something that would address in the concierge model, the care management model. And where that came from, and I touched on it briefly, was going to one of the funerals and meeting one of the widows and listening to her try to articulate the situation with her husband and how they had a hell of a time trying to find and navigate the effective resources required for him. And I remember a friend of mine who called me up, and her husband was in pretty tough shape. He's a police officer. And I was able, through our benefits team, we had an incredible benefits team at the office, get him, this is before the program came online, but to be able to get him the supports that he required. And I looked at the two. And because I represented thousands of people, it's impossible for me to know everybody. But in this case, she knew me and she could make the call. In the other case, she didn't know me. And I said to myself, I go, this is unacceptable. We need to have a central point that people can call at any time of the day and to be able to immediately get connected with the resources they need. And that's sort of what this book is about. It talks about the statistics. It's been operating for 5 years. As I said, it was up to 4,000 members and their families. The beauty of this program is we still have about 60% of the people that participated in this program since year 1 are still in the program. So they continue to receive emails. They continue to receive phone calls. They continue to engage. Not all of them are off. Some are off. Some are back. And so this program keeps people in the workplace. This people helps people that are out of the workplace. This program helps people get back into the workplace. Am I saying that, that this thing does everything for everybody? No. because I don't think I don't think there is something like that. I think that, but there isn't anything that I can think of that this doesn't offer. And so when we talk about our heads hitting the pillow at the end of the night, before we had this, I couldn't sleep. I was worried. I was scared. We were losing members. We were losing people by the hundreds out of the workplace. So when you look at it, not even from a financial standpoint, first and foremost, to your point earlier, what is one life worth? It's worth whatever you're going to put into this. It's you do everything that you can to succeed and to make it more than just a mile wide and an inch deep. And so the financial aspect of things, because people say, well, how we can't afford that. We can't afford that. Think about people not being in the workplace. Think about all the overtime that you have to spend to bring people in. Think about the people you're burning out on top of that because they're coming in to backfill those people. Think about the work environment where you have all kinds of people that are finally on their days off and they're saying, I'd love to help, but my days of coming in, backfilling because there's a staffing crisis, they're done. Because if I don't draw a line somewhere, and it really puts people like ourselves that this is a calling, it puts us really in a conflictual position because as first responders, we want to help. We want to serve. We don't want to let people down. But you know what? More and more, especially with the new generation, and I do respect them for this very much, more willing to put on that oxygen mask and say, you know what? I need to take care of myself physically, mentally, and I cannot get burned out like in the past. And so that's a critical piece. So this book here, and I'm not, hopefully this isn't a shameless plug or anything like that. I don't mind me raising it.
Plug
but
away.
Thank you, is In Pursuit of Mental Wellness in the First Responder Community. It's on Amazon right now. It's like I said, it's a couple-hour read. But I hope that if people are listening to this podcast, and I know they are, that maybe they're having difficulties within their respective services. There's some really, really good ideas that can be pulled out of this. And I'm really proud of our team. I'm really proud of the people that have stepped up to use it. And I'm really proud of the high percentage of people that sing this program's praises, because it takes that trust from others who use a program like this. If you don't have trust, you don't have anything. So there's this program, I'm super proud of it. And, if this is what I'm remembered for, if it's the only thing, I'm good with that. And, I feel like I can, get into retirement and be very proud that I know that my fellow brothers and sisters that are putting it on the line each and every day, both physically and mentally, they've got some good fallbacks. Yeah.
Beautiful. For people listening, you said that the book was available on Amazon. What if they want to learn more about you or reach out to you?
They're more than welcome to reach out to me at Rob K. Jamieson, Jamieson 8866 at gmail.com. And when you pull that up, you'll be able to the website for this as well. But yeah, there's lots of, and I would also encourage people as well, if they want, obviously, to do a search just on the Encompass program, ENCOMPAS, the OPP Association. And there's lots of stuff that's out there. You can see firsthand some of the challenges. But certainly 10 years ago, day two, we were an organization. And I think from a leadership standpoint as well, of how do you rebuild something to make it what it should be for the people that absolutely deserve it. And myself and the team of people I had around me really leaned in and did a deep dive. And when you look at where they are today, there's still more work to be done, but I'm really proud of the work that everyone has done.
Well, I want to thank you so much. It's been such an interesting conversation, especially the parallel between, some of your own mental health challenges and some of the solutions that you found, but then also, the union element, and how do you take something that has been kind of torn apart and start building those relationships and building that trust again. And then, obviously the Encompass solutions that you've got in the book. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thank you, James. It's an absolute privilege to be on here.